can we find another way? And the way I would like to find is one where we dig down to the processes that empower or that entrap. You've got one in the title of your podcast. You probably put it there because you know that it so easily becomes a trap, right? But there's a number of them. And I'm on a part of a scientific community that has been trying to get the smallest set that does the most things. We think we've actually done that.
Hi, I'm Ricky DeRiz, and welcome to episode 26 of the Mind That Ego podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Stephen Hayes, the founder and creator of acceptance and commitment therapy. This is one of the most well-used and well-researched forms of therapy in the world. It's even used by the World Health Organization as a tool for self-help and has almost 1,000 different clinical research studies into its effectiveness, to which it does extremely well. This is a type of therapy that I was introduced to a number of years ago through reading Russ Harris's book, The Happiness Trap. And it's really an honor to get the chance to talk to Stephen. Stephen's one of the most cited living scholars in the world. He's a prolific writer, having written 47 books and 675 articles that have been published in 20 different languages. This conversation is far-reaching and vast, and having gone into this with a bit of a structure and an idea of what we would discuss, we actually ended up covering so much ground that in a way spoke around the tenets of acceptance and commitment therapy. It's very much an expansive and process-driven conversation that really looks at the realm of thinking and thought and how that affects mood and behavior and the nature of, being human and mental health, and where mental illness fits within this spectrum. I'd actually like to jump in as well from a different route, because I know you do so much around like cognition and the relationship between cognition and reality and the way that language informs perception. Do you have any sense that technology has an influence in like the way that we cognize and the way we perceive reality? I know that's like quite a deep a deep question to kind of kick it off, but it seems like an intriguing one to kind of start the talk.
Well, let me give you an example of just one way. It's a small way. Maybe it's not as big enough for the grand question you asked. But we know that a deep sense of connection with others requires being able to take their perspective, being able to feel what it feels like once you've done that, to be you, and to not run away when it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Those three things predict, whether or not you even enjoy being with others. It predicts prejudice and stigma towards others, judgment of others, etc. And it also relates those same three things to whether or not you feel yourself to be whole and you have compassion for yourself. Because if you objectify and dehumanize others, you tend to do it to yourself. And the wagging finger, it goes back this way. Well, in the modern world, the camera can force perspective taking. You can see the bloated body of the Syrian 3-year-old boy who fell out of the boat on the beach. It can push empathy. You can see the tears of the mother weeping as she finds her son dead on the shore. But what it can't do is open up a space in which you don't run away. It invites you to run away to your little group that talks about those people, or to your sources of political anger, or wherever. You can split off and do that instead of connecting in consciousness to the human condition and you as part of it. So our sense of reality is different. I mean, my son's 17. He likes Minecraft and all those kinds of games. He knows what time it is in Australia, Berlin, and Reno at once, all the time, because his friends are around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, he has friends who he's never seen and considers them friends, and they play together regularly. So he has a worldwide consciousness. And, things like climate change are very close in his consciousness, which is a good thing, yes.
Yeah.
But also a burden when you see how badly it's being handled, and a challenge for all. So I would say yes. I mean, we're living literally in a different world substantively as technology expands. And boy, if you don't see how challenged that'll be when you check out Dolly and Chat GPT or something, you're just not awake. I mean, you're just not, you're asleep.
Yeah.
It isn't like 100 years from now. No. Now
it's arrived, hasn't it? It feels like this moment. Yeah.
We're in it. We're in that AI extended world. I'm in it in the work that I'm doing with mental health. I'm actively pursuing those tools and how to use them for good. So I gave you an answer that's a little superficial, perspective taking, empathy, etc. But if you dig in more, I mean, it's all the way down to how do you partition the world in your thoughts? We kind of have a common sense partitioning with our nouns and verbs, cup. But the gravity, you're not seeing the gravity. How even seeing the cup is light, right? In you. I mean, what you call seeing is the activation of your retina. And we didn't evolve to actually see things as they are. We evolved to survive, and it could be an active delusion. The whole thing could be like the Matrix movie, an operating system, so that you don't have to look at green falling letters.
Let's hope there's more magic
right now, which is run by ones and zeros, except there's no ones and zeros. Even that is a metaphor. And you can never interact with the machine code that allows us to do what we're doing, but you can interact with something that makes a file blue and rectangular, and you better not drag it over here. The thing looks like a trash can. There's no blue file. It's not rectangular. It's just an operating system. That's not true. Well, we don't. You don't know what the shape of my head really is. I could have a shape of my head that's 100 feet in both directions. You know what I'm saying? Along dimensions we're not even assessing yet. I mean, some have the electricity, some sense gravity, some we're living inside our own. So this is changing everything down to even what is anything.
I like that you described also like the code of the screen as a metaphor. It's almost like it's an extension. If consciousness is unfolding into technology, does it have the same essence in its kind of original form that is being replicated to scale? We become almost godlike and then produce our mini realities, and maybe it will just go on and on, like infinite regress into a Russian doll experience of reality.
We have a future ahead of us that is challenging and so awesome and so exciting. I mean, there are fewer people starving. There are fewer people being killed. I mean, I know you see it on television, but just do the math. Go look at the bones of people like several hundred years ago, and how many whacks and cuts and pokes and stabs that led to a longer life, etc. I mean, we're living in a world that humans only could have dreamed of, and it's becoming better, not worse, despite what the media and all of us draws into. We get pie in the sky pretty quickly, but I do believe the robots are coming. I do believe labor will be optional. And now we see Chat GPT,
Mm-hmm.
intellectual labor is optional.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah.
My poor son, who's really into computers, and he's he knows how to program really well, and then realized within the last week, he can just ask Chat GPT to do what he's been doing, and boom, he's got the
Yeah.
code. Oh my goodness.
It's quite
I
terrifying.
said to him, you better study AI, son.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just
Mm-hmm.
be thinking of yourself as a coder, because that's
Yeah.
now something that's, well, could we create a world in which we get to focus on art and literature and community and spirituality
Mm-hmm.
and health? And yeah, we could.
Yeah.
We could. Or we could create this dystopian nightmare
Yeah. That
of
choice point.
billionaires controlling the world and everybody else down there, taking the lives.
Yeah. I didn't think that we'd start here, but I love that we have. I love that we have like this. So one thing it leads me to is the link between like cognition, and you describe this so well in your work as well. You use the example of like the mug, but how the architecture of reality, or like the architecture of what we might call a worldview, is so often built upon the building blocks of labels and nouns, and then we kind of have experiences and story and this kind of thing as well. And it's as if the media, or even like not deliberate necessarily, but just the portrayals of the world through the media, through film, through TV, even through stories from our peers, passes on like this replica, or this symbol of reality that we can kind of internalize, and that becomes part of our reality if we're not aware of how that's creating a bit of a lens over our perception. But as you say, even our perception is just kind of unfolding in our brains to some extent, or in our consciousness.
No, what's happening is that we're grooving certain patterns of thinking without necessarily knowing the process or stepping up to the responsibility of it. Underneath the clinical work I do, in more therapeutic and intervention work on acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training, ACT in either case, is this geekier theory of language and cognition called relational frame theory.
Mm-hmm.
Which, the very thumbnail kind of thing is language is not associating. We've been trying to do that forever. It just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It's relating, and that it is learned, but it's under arbitrary contextual control. So you can apply it to anything. You can relate anything to anything else in any possible way, and you can easily show it. Pick any relation. Is the father of? Look around, see two objects in your environment, and then figure out how one is the father of the other, and you're going to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you finished, it's going to seem apt. It's like, oh yeah, that's really what's okay. Well, now here's the implication. Do the math of how many things are in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you got 25, 30,000 words, but each word is related to scores or hundreds of different events that have happened in your life. It's not just tree as a word. You've seen 1,000 trees, right? And you could probably distinguish among the trees. You can look at the features of the trees. That's just one word of those 40,000. Mm-hmm. Then think of the fact that anything can be related to anything else. If you're not convinced, we'll just walk through it. Now, do the math on what it would mean if you had in your head 40,000 things with, let's just say, 20 examples of each one.
Mm-hmm. And
that sequence matters when you think. If you just have a jumble of words, that's different than one that's structured by grammar, and that any relationship is possible to anything. How many potential thoughts are in your head? Mm. Well, I've done the math, and the answer is about twice as many, a number that's about twice as large, at least, as how many molecules there are in the universe. Wow. That's how many thoughts are in your head, potentially. So why do we get down to these rigid, narrow, I'm like this, or the world's like that, or I have to do this, and you can ask people, have you ever done it? If you just take mental health, I need to do this. Have you ever done anything like that before? Yeah. Did it work? No. But if I do it better, I got to do more of it. Okay, dude, what else have you tried? This and this and this. Were those kind of examples of the same thing? Yeah, but it didn't work. Okay, they didn't work. And you've tried many different variants and those didn't work. So what are you going to do? I need to do it better. No.
Yeah.
The mind just gets
Yeah.
grooved. I mean, the classic thing is I am a problem to be solved. And when my problem is solved, then I can start living. And the problem is I have all these bad feelings and bad memories. And so I'll focus on them, which makes them more dominant. And then I'll struggle them, which gives them more power. And then I will eliminate them, which never happens because there's no delete button in your nervous system. And then I'll be free. No, then you'll be entangled like a person in a net, in a fishing net. And that's where you are now. And it's going to get worse, not better. Well, that's the core of ACT, but it's also the core of the implication of having this amazing tool we've got. But you can break out of it, and all of our mindfulness and spiritual traditions, every single one, comes up with ways to do it. Repeated prayer, chanting, meditation, silence, dancing. I mean, it can be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But well, and what are you trying to do? You're trying to take that language monster and pull it off you like a bad horror movie so that you can see it, so that you have a little bit of choice to use this tool that could give you more than molecules in the universe in terms of ways of thinking about things. Those folks used to say, oh, you're not using a third of your brain space. There's 2/3 that are not used. Turns out it's mostly nonsense. But the core of that idea, you're just using a tiny part of this amazing tool that we invented. We're the only creatures on the planet to do this. That's part of my basic research. I can show you your 12-month-old baby does what the language trained chimps do not do. And if they don't do that, they don't develop what you and I are doing right now. It's part of what's in the basement of ACT is that RFT work. So we know we're extraordinary creatures, and boy, do we suffer amidst plenty. We're the only ones that know how to do that. We can create these wonderful things, and we could live inside a nightmare. And so how do we rein in this mind of ours and put it on a leash and use it when it's useful, problem-solving aspect, and use other parts when it's not, such as the parts of us that allow us to have this more spiritual side to us. It's a challenge, and we better get on it, because we need modern minds for this modern world that now it's moving so fast that you'll just drown. And the ability of other people to groove you. I mean, Netflix knows what you're, I'm living in a very nice house. Why? Because I had a publishing company. I saw what Amazon was doing before it was anything. And I bought a lot of Amazon stock because I realized if it can say to you in the earliest Amazon days when it's just doing books, as a publisher, I was following this, if you like this book, you'll like that book. Oh my God.
It's taken out the cognitive load.
They're going to say, 60% of the books are sold at Amazon. Just the books, but now it's everything. My point being, big data, big tech knows how to groove your mind. You better know something about how that works, and bring, just as a matter of responsibility. I've got a responsibility because I got an ability to respond. How am I gonna treat my own mind? And I do that with my body. I have exercise, I stretch, I get flexible. You got to do the same thing with your mental tools, or you're just going to be a tool.
Okay, there are many avenues in this molecule-rich universe, that many pathways and grooves we can follow. Something
more than molecules in the universe.
That's so a few options we've got. So something I that links to this, and it's maybe not continuing us in that direction, but it is something I'm really interested in your take on, which is quantum cognition, and this idea of the brain being like a quantum computer. And when you say about all these potentialities, I wonder if there is that element of almost anything, because with the amount of numbers that we're talking in terms of thoughts, you're getting close to infinity to some extent, of like an infinite potential.
Yeah.
And yet, like you say, we find our groove. We, from like I guess a spiritual context, we develop a personality, we develop an identity, an ego-based self, which is no doubt the deepest groove that we have, the I that we experience. And it's like the relationships that you mention, but always in the context, or I say always, but mostly in the context of I. So as we move through the world and we're relating to what is this in the context of me, or as you say, in terms of the need for empathy, we might be able to step outside and say, what is it in the context of this person, etc. Oh man, there are so many. So okay, so we've got quantum potential and thought is like an area I think would be interesting to look at in terms of how distinct these grooves that we get stuck in, how, in your experience, how distinct can a person become if they're stuck in these grooves, if they've got a mental illness, if they're depressed, if they've got panic disorder, anxiety, and they're really stuck. How distinct do you believe is possible for those grooves to change and to redirect and to find those different potentials in a world that is kind of demanding our attention elsewhere?
Well, I think we know something about the way to help knock people out of grooves that they're in. The different grooves that they're in are idiosyncratic, they're shared with others, but we're using a way of thinking itself to try to even understand that is mathematically disproven and people don't know it, that is wrong, and that has been around for 150 years for really dirty purposes. When you say, I have depression, for example, you're adopting a normative category that you're putting up top yourself, just to show how silly it is. If you took one of the last really big funded multi-site studies done with major depression, I say one of the last because even the feds here in the US and the major countries that do this kind of thing are getting fed up with funding it because they've been chasing these syndromes that are in the DSM or the ICD for like 50 years, and they never find latent diseases, which is the whole purpose. So they're getting discouraged. But the last, what probably is one of the last big ones, had 3,700 people in it, all having MDD, talk about a personality persona, a mask. I have MDD. Okay. Almost 1,000 different unique combinations of those 3,700 people of just the signs and symptoms that are in those books. Never mind their values, how they relate to the world, their spiritual beliefs, etc. And then if you say, well, how many people had a combination that's so unusual, only 0.1% of the whole population shared it, which is around 5. And the answer is close to half. So we're living inside categories. Even kids know where they are on the distribution, and they say, I'm gifted and talented, and my IQ is 135. And, well, that started with Galton. That started with his innovation, which was bell curves and standard deviations. He created it. But he created it in the same book that said, and when he's able to do that, he can sort people into unique categories. And the book was called Hereditary Genius. He's Erasmus Darwin's grandson, just like Charles Darwin was. They're cousins. And it's not 15 years later before he's saying, and we can use those tools for, but it's actually in the book, is to make sure that only the upper class white folks in the UK can have children. And he created eugenics. So the dirty history of these things is if we can get people to think in terms of their normative categories and we can shove them in there And over again. I mean, the first person to ever use the word schizophrenia, it's only about 4 years later, he's talking about how we can keep them from having children because they're polluting the pool. I mean, we went through an era, and then we saw the implications. By the way, it wasn't the Germans that started the really dirty deed. It was the Americans. Germans just borrowed word for word the laws that the Americans had used to already start sterilizing people. Massive number of people were sterilized in the U.S. Almost every state allowed it. For what? For intellectual disability, for personality disorders, for alcoholism, for anything that was different. So we're living in, people need to wake up that we're living inside this story that you can do that to people and characterize them. And then it foretells your future. Well, it's false. It's there I go into something that's just too off topic, but
it's
physics, statistical physics figured out 100 years ago that you couldn't do that when they were trying to predict molecules of gas from the volume of gas. And we're just waking up to the fact that you cannot go from, oh, here's your IQ to what your life is going to be like. Because it interacts with all these other unique things. So coming back to your answer, we are massively unique. And I and my colleagues have started to take these top-down normative categories, pick anyone that you like, and look to see how much individuality busts that up. And almost anything that you believe and anything that you say about mental health or the behavior of people, I'll show you is untrue for 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10, 2 out of, for a lot of people. Not just untrue, like it doesn't apply, but sometimes it's the exact opposite. Can I give you an example?
Please do. All right. I'm just, what you're saying is setting off so much that I've got to work with my own impatience.
Well, me too. It keeps me awake at night because it's like, oh my God, we have so much work to do to create a behavioral science more adequate to the challenge of the human condition. But take something that's really sweet and all kind of like self-compassion. You got to have self-compassion because then you'll have compassion towards others. And you look at it empirically, and by golly, it's true. You know, they correlate, and you can do the big group designs, and it's there. Okay, and then you start doing high-density longitudinal data and look within the lives of individuals. 1 out of 5 people, the nicer they are to themselves, the meaner they are to others. And by the way, they're the ones for whom self-compassion doesn't lift up their life, of course. It makes them miserable. And you've all seen it. You take care of the kids. I got to go meditate. You know, I need my bubble bath. You know, dude, what are you doing? I mean, a good mindfulness tradition would have a monk that would whack you upside the head with a stick for that. But we put it into the world with all our commercial entity. I mean, everybody in this doc is talking about mindfulness and self-compassion, and even my own work, acceptance and values. Ooh, you better really dig down to how that whole thing fits together for you. In such a way that it lifts you up and doesn't push you down, or not even, it doesn't lure you into yet another egoic category that will kill your soul and harm the people around you.
Do you know, it's such an intriguing point, and I think you're also kind of pointing at this as well, that self-compassion becomes its own category that we misinterpret a lot of time. It's language based. We don't have the philosophical spiritual grounding to fully connect to. It's beyond, it's not, like you say, it's not an ego identity, it's a practice. That essence of self-compassion, no doubt, is rewarding to each individual and their environment. But if you do claim self-compassion as like, I'm being self-compassionate, like the example you give, you can become more selfish. So it's like, how do you find those lines between the way we distinguish?
I mean, this the title of your podcast. It's right on this, isn't it? I mean, we're looking, Ricky, at ego and kind of what is it, and how does it work, and it happens in there. I mean, the when your mama's eyes met yours when you were a neonate. You dumped endorphins in your brain, and so did mama, because you're connected in consciousness. Yeah. But as we then start using this invention of ours of human language, which I think started out of cooperation, being able to say a word and have somebody else bring something back, and I have good reasons to believe that. The very brains that allow us to think this way didn't evolve because of their impact on cognition. That's upside down evolution. It's way too costly to have a big brain. It eats massive amounts of calories. It makes it hard to have babies. You got to take care of them for years just so they can even walk around. I mean, it's like a ridiculous idea that you should have big brains. Yeah, but if you follow out how it grew, it's so correlated with the extent of your social network and the complexity of your social network. The hominins have been on this journey for 1 million years, of gradually bigger brains for social purposes. And then the fire being lit moment where you can learn a sign or a symbol in one direction and drive it in two. Lots of animals have characteristic sounds or whatever, gestures, hoots, and the listeners react characteristically, and the troop does better. But we're the only ones where the same part of the brain lights up. If I say that's a metronome, as you reaching over and passing the metronome to me, I mean the part of verbal understanding versus speaking are integrated because it's an act of cooperation. But and that's wonderful that we've invented that. But then it's based on perspective taking. If I say apple, you have the perspective, oh, he wants an apple, give it to me. That learn it in one, derive it in two, relational thing. It then becomes not just same but different and opposite and bigger, and that's that more molecules in the universe situation that is the father of can apply to anything. Any relation can apply to anything. Well, you get also IU. I mean, that mama's eyes moment is two organisms interacting, and the fact that we are a cooperative we. The brain sort of is set up to say that because it's so important. I mean, that baby's smile has to really goose mama's, or else why would you take care of these rugrats? They're going to poop on the floor. Come on, what about? They're so cute. And the same thing, the kind eyes, the babies are tracking, they're learning even before they get language to extend it, they're learning how to be a social primate. Well, IU and here, there, and now then, as it's learned, comes into forms an I here now. And there's a point there where you can go out and look back at yourself. It's a very wonderful and very dangerous point. I think that's really the place where human consciousness breaks from what is an incremental process of doing a better and better job of coming in contact with the one world in such a way that we survive. I mean, our sensory systems and so forth have all evolved to do that. So have our communication systems. But that point at which we can step back and look back at ourselves and think about ourselves that way, either it can be this kind of witnessing, noticing, spiritual awareness that it's everyone, always, everywhere. That you're part of the one, or so integrated with one that you can't even say part because there's no edge. You start talking in really spooky spiritual ways. And everywhere I go, there I am. That kind of thing. Either it leads to that, and it does. We're kind of wired for spirituality in that way. Or that moment leads to, oh, I am like this, and the group needs me because I'm special, especially needy. Help me. Or I'll make your group great again. I'll sell a baseball cap and you can put it on there. And we've got massive examples of this kind of narcissistic side, or the entitled disability side. And both of them are lies. I mean, so you have to be careful about the answer to who are you. You'll adopt that persona,
Yeah.
that mask. It's not that you're going to have a pattern. I mean, we look like something, but that's not who you are. Just how you're carrying yourself right now. And how do we help? Right now we're back to spirituality. How do we help people find? And I think the core of spirituality is softening the egoic self, the I am. But then, of course, it turns into dogma and religious wars. And I'll kill all the unbelievers who don't think like me. And oh gosh, again, we don't need religion for that. So we're going to have to do it a different way. And I don't know. I think we may actually find some ways. I mean, look at how many people are listening to your podcast on these kinds of machines.
Yeah. And how we can even facilitate
your podcast, because there's a yearning, I think, for the kind of experience of being whole and free as a being who is spiritual, you can say, but don't objectify and grasp even that, or you'll miss the point. But it's hard even to talk about, because language is about things and spirituality is about no thing. It's the edgeless, dimensionless expansion of human consciousness that's possible inside the I hear nowness of awareness that connects you in consciousness to others.
Man, there's so many directions to go. I was studying a course from someone called, I think he's called Ron Unger, and he's part of I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. I think it's the Institute of something to do with psychosis in America. And he's looking at spirituality and treatment within that framework. But he referenced the Zen koan, which is like mouth open, first mistake. And it's like you point to, it's ineffable, that dimension. The moment you try and talk about it, it's gonna be lost in translation to some extent. And equally, this oscillation between like the transcendent, which seems to be beyond language, right? There's a very like kind of strong, at least in my experience, a correlation between language as an internal experience, cognition, thought, and something transcendent beyond that, awareness or the observer, which is part of the act philosophy as well. And then such association to thought and to body and to identity that it has that narcissistic edge. I'm trying to think of what route to follow with this, because today, so I'll share what's present, bring in some of my experience, and we can use it as an example, because it's actually based on something I'm going to write soon, which is based on my own experiences of paranoia. So I've experienced extreme paranoia in the past, and psychosis, and panic disorder, depression, all the classifications that you can find. They've kind of surfaced in my life. And for me, paranoia is, or has, latent potential as a vehicle of awakening, because it's that extreme end of tapping into something where the I is so amplified, and it's almost like when it becomes so immensely amplified, it can just collapse in on itself into that experience of oneness, right? And I was writing today and trying to articulate this, because I've been really lucky to have what I'd call like a contrast experience, which is something outside of those grooves that I can try and grow towards, through my meditation practice and awakening, to use that term loosely. And at different stages of my development, I started to notice that I'd have like extreme paranoia in certain situations, but then I'd also have what would be called a oneness experience And
Yeah.
as you say, where you cannot even define a part, it's just like all process.
Yeah.
It's just the most beautiful and yet somehow natural experience ever. And I was in a similar state to that this morning, and from that contrast, I was able to explore this oscillation, and there was something in it where, like, in that, for me, the experience of oneness, there's like an anonymity to it. I'm aware who I am. Like, I'm not completely dissociated. I know who I am. I'm present. I'm so connected to my environment that it's almost like that I sense isn't online,
Yeah.
and it connects me deeper. Well, I'm just a part of it, so I'm in that flow. Whereas the paranoia is disconnecting,
Yeah.
and yet it's like, let's say that the energy or consciousness, the interconnected consciousness, is filtering through some system that says I'm the center of everything rather than I'm in everything and I'm just part of it. It's like
Oh,
that
yeah.
I amplifies. And I just wanted to share that as an example because I've been really like meditating on this for a long time,
Yeah.
because that's been a groove of mine that is teaching but also highly distressing as well, to say the least. But yeah, that was just a sharing to see what that kind of, where that leads, I guess.
Well, I think it's a lot of places for me to go from that. You know, the ACT community has done a lot of work around psychosis, and we've made some progress in the sense of, uh, boy, if you had to pick a population that's objectified and dehumanized by the system, whew,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where, you know, if you get fully into that whole thing as the mental health system, I mean, next thing you know, the only things people want to talk about with you are hallucinations and delusions and medications, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's who you are, and that's
Yeah.
who you're going to be treated as. And, you know, there's folks walking around who are voice hearers who are doing perfectly well as lawyers or doctors or whatever. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, not just, you know, Nash and his Nobel Prize. That's just one example. It's everywhere. So how are we to be doing that? Well, it seems scary to people, but I think you're right that, you know, that flip, you know, like the paranoid place of I am threatened by and fearful of because has this edge, you know, of me and not me,
Yeah.
and they're in a relationship that's dangerous and it's grooved. And, you know, some of those things are predicted. I'm just going to riff a little bit. Do you know that if you want to predict the developmental trajectory of who can develop psychotic breaks and paranoia, there's things in there that are odd. You know, I hate this kind of thing. Oh, you just got the psychosis gene or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not. I mean, of course, genes are part of it. Of course, they're part of it. But here's one that's really powerful. People who have to uh, change language communities early, right at the point where self is establishing, move to a country where they don't speak your language at age 4 or 5. You know, that, you know, your probability of actually developing, and you can kind of see why. Could you go into I and not I, and then
Yeah. The
your
language
way?
vowel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, of course, early kind of traumatic or negative experiences where you know, you can retreat into that. Or that's retreat's not the right word. Defend naturally,
Yeah.
defend yourself. And as a child, of course, what else would you do? That's exactly what you should do. You know, the experience of that allows empathy and connection and perspective taking, of taking I, you, here, there, now, then, time, place, and person, the perspective taking cognition that is there even before language. I mean, babies will understand something about the intentionality. If you come in and you ask a baby to give you something by just pointing, they don't have even a single word yet. Depending on the context, they will either give it to you or put it in the box because you're playing cleanup time and it's time to put away your toys. They will guess about what you mean by that point. We're kind of deeply connected in that way as social primates. And the core, I think, of that collapsing and expanding that you're talking about is that I only makes sense in the context of you. Here only makes sense in the context of there. There's no here without there. Even if you go there, there becomes here, and here becomes there.
Yeah.
Now and then, the same thing. And that's fine, but recognize that they're connected. And under special circumstances, psychedelic assisted therapy, we're deep into doing that. Psychosis, under special conditions, I think the I here nowness of awareness that is not objectified becomes objectified typically. I'm like this. And then you start either defending or amplifying or wanting everybody to know about it if you're a narcissist or whatever. But you have a story and you're in the story and now you're captured by the story. And, so self and the concept of self, ego, etc., easily forms out of I, here, nowness. But it isn't just I, it's I, you. It isn't just here, it's here, there. It's part of, and under extraordinary conditions, it's like three comets coming together to I, here, now. It expands out and it's all of us, everywhere, always.
Yeah.
If you ask the questions right, 97% of people will admit to experiences of sudden expansion of I becoming a we, or of now becoming always, or of here becoming everywhere. I mean, it isn't just Tolle.
Yeah.
It's just the Buddha.
Putting language to it, but
and our spiritual leaders are extraordinarily good. They almost always have had a mystical spiritual experience, almost always. And they will talk about these kinds of things, but they turn it into a way, a path, or something. It has to be done in words, and therefore, well, fine, nothing wrong with that. But can we find a place where we can work on the suffering that comes from our egoic I in a way that doesn't require you genuflecting in front of a spiritual leader and having the master give you the answers, but that is a kind of a humbler form of that. That's not prideful even about the pathways, and that empowers people to find these consciousness expansion. I don't want to turn this into a stone in a box, it's precious, because it's yet another round of the same thing. But can we empower people to find a place in which I dissolves into we, and here to there, and now to always, or now to then, to time itself, disappearing. I think the answer is probably yes. And one reason I'm working so hard at psychedelic assisted therapy is that even though I'm a child of the 60s and I know what a train wreck that was done the first time, and I literally lost friends to it. I mean, I literally had them die in how badly it was managed. I still do believe I'm enough of an old hippie to believe that, the indigenous peoples are right. There's ways of using aids, whether it's being in a sweat lodge or chanting or praying, or mushrooms or whatever the thing is, guided properly. That doesn't make it a certainty, but it makes it more likely, where you bring people in to a place where they have a chance to break out of the cage that we tend to live inside, the storied, defended, artificially amplified self, into this no thing sense of self. Now, I think even no self can turn into the same egoic thing. And I've had so many folks
100%.
who want to like argue me into, oh no, the ACT model of self is really the same thing because blah, 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 blah. And say, okay, but please, can we quiet a little bit? Because I don't want to be shouted about the no thing self, because I don't have to, listen very hard before I don't hear the same thing that you say that you're going after.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I
So
do. Yeah, I do.
I honor your journey. I think it's awesome that you're speaking about this in this way, because there's people who are objectified and dehumanized who need to hear it,
Mm.
and who are on a journey that could be really important to us. And
Yeah.
And everybody is. It's just that's another form. And in our wiser cultural things, we would often have a place for people who have had psychotic breaks. They were special. Now that's dangerous too, but
Yeah.
some of the wisdom that comes from that journey could be shared by being a shaman or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, we're doing a better job of this, but we used to actually take away people's freedoms, shove them in a box and fill them full of chemicals, whether they like it or not, or even operate on their brain whether they're not going to not, or sterilize them. I mean, back to eugenics. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, oh my God. But that's still going on.
Yeah.
Parts of that are still going on. So yes, it's really cool. Kind of you implode a system.
Yeah. I want to coalesce this into something, but what came to mind was kind of the Jungian approach, like when you were talking about the here and there and the tension of opposites. And there does seem to be, just to use myself as a guinea pig again for this, in my experience, there does tend to be an energy to these experiences that, one way I've described it, like when having like disconnected, like maladaptive, or like an unpleasant, I'll say a psychotic experience or paranoid, whatever, language in doesn't matter so much, but there's a sense for me of being underwater, and as if I'm under a certain pressure energetically. So if you imagine like there's an ocean of energy, just I could just be walking to the shop, just want to go and get some bread and some eggs, and I'm just walking to the shop and then having this kind of experience. What I've noticed more recently, because this has happened in recent times, as much as I'd like to pretend this all, in the past, I've cycled back to these experiences from a different space. And there tends to be a pattern where this I experience amplifies, and there's tension between me and the environment. And the only way I can describe it, like you say, the word implosion, is an actual embodied feeling of this pressure building. And I had this, my group of my friends visited Berlin in the summer, and I had like an experience in a bar. It was the first time I went to a bar in like 2 years, and I was already stretching myself a little bit in terms of like the social environment, and I'd spent a lot of time alone, a lot of solitude, a lot of meditation. And as soon as I walked into this bar, my experience was as an extension of the paranoia, like my experience has been essentially the background noise becoming about me. So it warps in my perception. So it will be a commentary on like how I'm being. And it's always like, I'm being weird, or like, is that guy okay, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've got enough awareness now, fortunately, after I've been meditating for almost 10 years. So it's helped me, it saved me really, meditation. There's enough there to question it and not fall fully into this delusion. But the interesting thing is, when this has happened, that thought is accompanied by this feeling of intense pressure energetically in the environment. And then something strange happens, which is that it builds and it builds. It's like my body's struggling to hold that. And there's this energetic sensation of, and through that, that's when I'm then like completely calm, and I can feel the sense of stillness that I get deep in meditation. So it's as if like it bursts. It implodes, it bursts, and then I'm like, boom! I'm now experiencing a oneness experience, and the thoughts go. Then it's almost like if you saw it in a movie, like those thoughts would be replaced by the actual background chatter, and I'd look around and be like, that was really odd, this whole projection. So that's something I've noticed, and potentially a bit of a tangent in terms of this tension of opposites and the transcendence of that. I'm really keen. Sorry, did you have? Yeah, I'll let you
Well,
talk.
I haven't thought about it, like ask. It'll come in a kind of orthogonal, but see if it somehow touches at all. I've come to believe that this whole issue of self is connected to a deeper yearning, which is that of belonging. They're basic human needs. And when I was talking about the baby in the mother's eyes, belonging is really, really, really important for us as social primates. We will literally die without it when we first arrive. It requires those giants called adults to take care of us. That's biologically programmed. I mean, it's doesn't mean that you can't choose to be a hermit or whatever. It doesn't mean everybody has to be social. It doesn't. No, but it means you're part of a we by birth, and you're evolutionarily prepared to be. That's why you're, within 24 hours of birth, if kind eyes meet yours, you dump in natural opiates in your brain. I mean, it's that important that you really want to be able to recognize that sense of connection and belonging. But also that you can lose belonging, and it would be a threat if you did. It would be, I mean, you can be attacked, you can be excluded, you can be rejected, you can be cast out, you can, and again, in our evolutionary history, moving around in small bands and tribes and so forth, that would often mean death.
Yeah.
If you're rejected, cast out, you're one dead monkey. I mean, you're just not going to be able to navigate without the help of your mates. So you have this duality of belonging being can be threatened, and sort of this sense of special and unique can be used to try to be something in a group, but it could also be criticized, and you can be the source of excluding a group. The oneness that we connect with, I think, is something more like we belong by a birthright. I'd be interested in your experience of that sense of peace and of expansion if belongingness disappears as an issue. Because like a paranoid thought that says they're talking about me, and they're talking about me in critical ways, there's something wrong with me, or they're going to hurt me, or they don't like me, or they don't want me, or they're going to do. Well, these are threats to belonging, maybe even to my physical existence. They want to kill me, they're going to chase me, they're whatever. But when it goes poof, it's something more like belonging is the floor that you're standing on. It's not something you have to earn. You're a human being. You're part of us. I mean, if you think about it just this way, this maybe won't touch in the emotional way, but the very words that you use that would lead to being special and excluded and maybe being rejected or great and grand, the narcissism or paranoia, all of those different forms, were taught to you by other human beings. They had to care for you and teach you and help you and feed you and,
That's true.
clothe you. And they brought you into the human community that is even able to do that, because this is a tool that can be so important for us, I think, in terms of cooperation, but now problem solving, and now being able to do things like, how many thousands of miles are between you and I right now?
God.
Thousands.
Thousands. Yeah.
And we're talking in real time.
And
And you know
able
how
to.
many people had to create the materials that allow this moment to happen? How many thousands of alive and dead people had to touch the wires that were made and the machines that work and the code that was written? I mean, there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of human beings sitting here with us, empowering a conversation between two human beings. I think there's a stillness and a oneness that comes when you realize that need for belonging has already been met. If you were the last person on earth, it would still be with you, as you would think about what you might want to leave behind if the aliens land and investigate what happened to Ricky in his last 20 years on earth. We're so social that we're social even when we're not social. Our minds are a social creation. Language is a social creation. Everything is social, everything. So it's just one needs of the many. I think we yearn to feel, we yearn to, be able to have our own sense of purpose and to be able to be competent in accomplishing that. We haven't talked about psychological flexibility in the model that's underneath the act, but every one of them is linked to a basic human yearning. But this one, this self one, now the tragedy of the egoic self, whether it's narcissism or also use paranoia as a flip. But if you don't feel objectified by me doing it, I would normally think of as the flip being something more like pathology. I'm broken. But those are, I think, are just reflections of the mishandling of that need. And its intensity is a reflection of the importance of that need. When you have that moment of awareness, when you have that psychedelic spiritual thing, when you have that paranoid, the intensity of it is because belonging is so important to us. We yearn for it. We were born yearning for it. And the irony is we have it. We do. You wouldn't even be able to think and talk about it the way we do if you hadn't belonged enough that other human beings cared about you in that way. And yet, I would say the vast majority of human beings walk around most of the time feeling as though their belongingness is threatened, or has to be earned, or is conditional, or will go away, or is only because, whatever the reasons are. It's a tragedy of the egoic mind, is that it would be like being in a room with a big gigantic banquet and you're down on the floor chewing on the table leg because you're so hungry. It's sad and sweet and poignant and bittersweet. Hard to be human.
Something that came to mind when you were talking was the separation of that word belonging as be longing, or like longing to be. And this sense of, because like you said, you could be the last person on earth, and yet if you could still meet that longing to be if you sense the interconnection of everything and being completely, like, even this beautiful example as well, because people talk of interconnection a lot in spiritual terms, but also in the material, in how like we're all made up of the atoms from the beginning of time, and we're made of stardust and all this beautiful stuff. But my my perennial struggle has always been that, like, meeting my need for time alone and meeting my need for community. And it's interesting that, so I've got one of your quotes, I think is from a Liberated Mind, which is we hurt where we care and we care where we hurt.
Yeah.
And the irony is, which is kind of become clearer when you were talking as well, the irony is the thing that it's like a meta problem, because it's like the thing that I experience, i.e. paranoia, and like in the past it's just been like depression and all, essentially being different, essentially being somehow misunderstood, or like just not fitting in with society, all the ways that one can self-ostracize based on these cultural messages and stuff. That's the thing that separates me. And do you know what I have to say, which is also beautiful, is that so in that experience in the bar, when that implosion happened, and I will get emotional likely talking through this, but as well as stillness, there's this huge gratitude and sense of compassion and like being able to be open with my friends about it. Like I just felt so much love for them in that moment, because it was like through this sense of brokenness and this sense of fragility and this sense of I'm different from everyone else, that kind of dissolved into these people care for me.
Right.
But I could feel it. Like I just connected to it in a way that I do struggle with a lot of the time, to really, really connect to that. So there is this like, it's this like almost like imploding into love. I know you mentioned this in your TED talk as well. Like love is all there is, or everything there is.
Yeah.
And there is, there is that kind of experience. I think is so important that we learn about. Talking for myself, that I learn about, but also, how does one break through that kind of experience, you know?
You know, just being and being loving are almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're aspects of the same thing, or they're sort of sides of the same thing, or qualities of the same thing. And you could say that, we learn, we yearn to belong. Or you could say we yearn to just be, and you could say we yearn to be loved and loving. And we can use this problem-solving mind that we've got to help us on that. But it's tricky. It's full of two-edged swords, because when you buy into it and adopt it and become it and assume it and make it true and you hold on to it, and then you're just a thought, you're a thing, you're a position, you're a story, you're a rap or a category and there's whole great portions of you that are part of our journey that are not captured by that wonderful invention we came up with, but that is not all of us, that are then lost to you. I mean, your felt sense, your intuition, your sense of spirituality, your connection to others that are beyond words. I mean, have you ever had this sense with something that's really special and loving, like a moment that actually happened, that you're very cautious about talking about it, that you don't really want to, like, if I said something like if you think of somebody who you really love, he loves you, and I ask you, I'll say, why?
Mm.
That'd be a pause there. Like, I almost don't want to go there. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Yes, we're coming up on Valentine's Day, but it gets the thinking about it. It's really close to something, and you know it. You know it
Yeah.
because it's so beautiful. Yeah, but then the person they had an auto accident on the way home, and you don't know it until they arrive, and they're not going to be beautiful again their whole life. So I guess you don't love them, right? I mean, do you know what I mean?
It's essence, yeah.
There's something. I mean, it's the same thing with just intensely spiritual experiences, or that Zenish thing of those who know don't speak and those who speak don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where because language divides, you can't say a word that doesn't invite you into this, not that.
Yeah.
As distinct from.
Yeah.
And we're talking about experiences of oneness and connection that doesn't divide, it unifies.
Yeah.
And so we yearn for that. We're born for it. We're prepared for it. And we've developed tools that will help us, but are really, really, really close to making it almost impossible. And that's why I say, we need modern minds for this modern world, because we're experiencing right now an expansion of human consciousness driven by technology that is now going at light speed, so fast that our cultural traditions can barely even notice. Well, we notice it, but can't characterize it or give us almost any guide, because we're really out into brand new territory that's never happened on the history of the planet. Nothing even like it. And the closest thing is like, Gutenberg or something, but that's so far away from what we've got now with instant, across the world, all voices can be heard, almost all. And I think we're going to manage this. I think we're going to find ways. The way that I'm trying to do it as a mental health person is, let's walk away from some of the top-down normative categories. Enough with Galton's eugenic dreams. It doesn't really, we haven't talked about why, but I can walk through the math of why it doesn't predict your journey anyway, and start focusing instead on processes that empower. And we've learned a lot about that, and they are in our wisdom traditions. And, our mindfulness processes are a big part of it. But so is compassion and learning how to live a values-based life, how to care about others and put your feet behind that and create habits so even when you're not watching, you're doing things that are more like who and how you want to be. So, your podcast is about this mental health and spirituality thing. Well, I think over time, those will become one thing.
Yeah.
Not mental disorders and treating mental illness. Oh, please.
I love that you say that.
I'm talking about your mental health, which is part of your behavioral health, which is part of social wellness, which is part of you being part of a planet where the we matters. And yes, climate change is important. And yes, of course, economic disparities and immigration and racism and how we treat people who are different, and gender and sexual differences, and all those things we need to step up to. We need a spiritual transformation, but we're not going to get it inside gurus and religious groups only. I mean, I'm fine with empowering it. I've written a whole book on ACT for clergy and pastoral counselors. The U.S. military chaplains teach ACT as one of 3 things they teach other chaplains in. I've helped with those programs. I'm fine with that if you have a religious commitment. And spirituality and what religion is about is too important for the history of the world for us to only think in terms of things that evolved culturally thousands of years ago. There's things that are evolving culturally now that are also important to that journey. It doesn't subtract from the other ones. And we're going to have to find a way. I think we're going to also have to think about this in a way that is not top-down normative and categorical, but a
Yeah.
bottom-up process-based and individual. Well, individual is the wrong word because it's almost the exact opposite of individual. We had to make up a word to talk about it. We've made one up called idionomic. Why? Do you know the word normal in the English language didn't go into the dictionary until 1848? You can hardly have a conversation at the kitchen table without using normal, typical, usual, or
Yeah.
average. It's
Yeah.
everywhere because that's how we've been taught to think for 150 years. And what we need to think about, it's different, is not that normal. It's kids no longer want to do.
Yeah.
You know what? I used to teach classes in abnormal psychology. Do you know you can't sell a book now in abnormal psychology? They're
In
called
what sense?
they're called psychopathology. If you call it abnormal psychology, the kids won't buy it.
Right.
They
Yeah.
refuse to buy the book because they've got this device
Yeah.
that has taught them I can have it my way. It's my music stream. It's not a radio station. It's my particular choices of what I watch. It's not something that's going to be forced on me. I get to do it my way. Well, where does normal fit into that? It doesn't. It doesn't. It's some sort of something out of the 1800s. And enough already. You don't have to fit into a normal category. Bust the whole idea of normal.
Yeah.
Because it's mostly a lie, and it doesn't tell you what to do. So what could? Well, it's like how people learn to pick a diet that really helps them, or an exercise program that really helps them. You're going to have to do it in a way that's more focused on what works for you, in a way that's rational and guided by science, but isn't top-down dictatorial. This is how you have to be, because the same thing with spirituality.
Yeah.
Same thing with mental resilience, mental health. It's not 1 out of 5. It's not the broken ones who have a disorder. That's all this bull. It's anybody who was awake during the last 2 years of COVID knows it. It's all of us every day.
Yeah.
And what is the it? We're working on our mental health. And that means our ability to visit the spiritual side of us, to be more loving, to have relationships that really work, to care about others, to bring more compassion and kindness into the world, and us as a participant in the one. Yeah. Even to say those sentences, probably sounds like wouldn't land with everybody. But what's underneath it does land with everybody.
Yeah, because we all have our own filtering part of this to filter stuff through our own lens, our own machines. How are you doing for time? I'm aware we're approaching an hour and a half. I'm conscious of it. I don't want to open too many tangents if you're strapped for time. Have you got a bit longer or?
Thank you for the kindness. Let me have a peek. Yeah, I'm good. I can go another half an hour at least if you would like to. Up to you.
I would be happy to, yeah, because I'm going to move on to Thomas Saz, because that's his name's been in mind. But before that, a huge moment for me was reading Scott Peck's Road Less Traveled, and in particular, I remember what section, because he talks about love and he talks about kind of growing through love and that kind of thing as well. And he mentioned, I think is towards the end of the book, that depression can be an act of grace. And I remember when I read that, it just landed, and I was like, and I was with my friend at the time, my housemate, and we had a lot of conversations about mental health and that kind of thing. And I remember sharing it with her, and we both just looked at each other just like, depression can be an act of grace. Now we both had that spiritual dimension. We both had our different practices, and it kind of spoke to an intuition around, it's not the 1 in 5, it's the 5 in 5. And yet the 1 in 5, people like me that are having these like depression, suicidality, paranoia in my past, as well as occasional flutters in my present, they're the moments that cause you to look at the self, at your own psychology, because you don't really have a choice. And I know for me, it was like survival. I've got to do inner work for survival, and it really was like that. And I think there's something intriguing in that. We don't. So what I would like to segue into is that what we don't want to do is romanticize, right? Because there's a risk of like romanticizing mental illness, and I've experienced myself start to go in that direction, and can see and that becomes another identity and another trap along the way. But there's this balance to be found in terms of not romanticizing mental illness, and also allowing it to be an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for insight. And I'm a big believer that all of these experiences are lessons. They all teach something profound, like for sure. And I'd like to use that to circle us back to Thomas Saz, because I read The Myth of Mental Illness recently. Incredible book, absolutely incredible. I love his way of thinking. I love how direct he was, because he was around in the 60s as well, I believe, like when he wrote that, around in the 60s. And it tapped into what I feel like a lot of people, if they really look in their heart, will intuit, which is that there's more to this. There's more to this than classification and division and labeling. That there is, and you mentioned earlier, like indigenous tribes, shaman. Again, what we don't want to do is like create a subculture of self-assigned shaman who romanticize it. But there is that case, isn't there, of looking beyond the myth. And I'm genuinely so grateful. I'm so grateful that you brought this topic up, because I wouldn't have personally, and I'm always tentative, because I'm not qualified. I'm not a psychologist. I'm independent. I'm more of a journalist with my own experience to rely on, and a lot of study as well. A lot of study, but it creates a tentativeness. But I do feel that it's so important that people like you are seeing things in this way, the spectrum. I'd love to send you this video if you're up for watching it at another point. But I made a video on there's no such thing as depression, which for me to do that was huge. Like I was so nervous posting it. But it spoke to what you mentioned around, and I believe when I was looking at your work, it was in an interview that you did, possibly of Russ Harris, around like what we mean by depression as a label,
right,
and how that whole system operates in terms of this is what has been identified as depression, and here's the concept that we have, and we have a checklist of symptoms that someone who's trained, and I feel like I'm taking a risk sharing this with you now, but whatever. Like we have people that are trained, that have internalized this checklist, this understanding, this concept. Maybe they're also bringing in their own experience or whatever. And then you have, in terms of a diagnostic, you have someone that has to relate to their experience, verbalize it, because we don't have those biomarkers. As far as I'm aware, there's still not much there. Verbalize it, either through, we get a lot of like self-diagnostics now with like Google and that kind of thing, but hopefully with a with a professional, and go through a process where they share, and there's this kind of feedback loop. And with this video, I was just pointing to how what we label depression is the result of looking at so many different experiences of people, finding correlations, developing a thread of understanding, and that label is actually really important to validate, and it can be really good to validate, but it can also be a hindrance, and it was for me. And I wonder if you could talk to that. That wasn't a question, it was just me kind of riffing off a bit, but talking to this labeling, because we're at a time where it seems that everything is classified to like the most minute, this idea of concept creep, like everything's classified as pathology. What are your views on that, and how do we overcome it?
Yeah, we're kind of running this thing out to the point where it reaches its logical a dead end. And I do have to say, I'm suspicious of the cultural forces behind that are making money off of it, a lot of money off it, especially a $1.4 trillion industry that is only too happy to biomedicalize human suffering and finds ever more elaborate ways to do it. Even children are being exposed to massive amounts of chemicals that the human nervous system never evolved to be able to withstand, with side effects that are now known to be pretty long-term, and that the same industry will only too happy to market yet another thing to manage the side effects. I mean, in the US of A, we can have advertisement for that, and we will have advertisements for the constipation produced by opiates, or for tardive dyskinesia produced by the anti-psychotics, so-called, so it's an endless loop of more and more and more, and you can go out into the open ocean off of Florida and catch the fish, and they're going to contain painkillers, antidepressants, and antipsychotic medications. And even those words are marketing terms. They're all lies. They're not antidepressants. They're not antipsychotic. That's not what those chemicals are. I've done randomized trials of ACT to help people get over resistance to prescribing medications for the right time and the right place at the right amounts for the right period. I'm not an anti-medication person, and I'm taking it there, but I want to come back to the other place you were taking it, which is there's something, I tell clients at some point, not early on, because it can be very invalidating and it tempts people into self-aggrandizement, that you're one of the lucky ones. Because there's a whole lot of folks out there in the 5 out of 5 universe who are putting one foot in front of the other and getting through life, kind of, sort of, but not in ways that empower their relationships or open up the possibility of what they could be about at work, or empowers them as citizens and as caring creatures who could help others on the planet, and on it goes. Pain will give you a chance, and you're looking at a panic disordered person in recovery. I mean, that's part of my journey. And I've absolutely believe that 3 years of panic struggle was like a massive gift. But I don't want to make it special. I was kind of walking through this at one point in a workshop, and somebody came up to me, a young person, almost weeping, says she wants to be an ACT therapist. She wants to be a good therapist, but she had a normal childhood. She was happy most of her life.
One of the unlucky ones.
And I paused. I kind of looked at her and I said, you know what you just said, that's enough. She's in pain over the fact that she wasn't in enough pain, so she's not going to be a good therapist, because that's the same thing. The same thing. So, we all have plenty enough to be able to say, okay, this far and no farther. There's a lesson in here, and I am going to learn it. And If you do it in an egoic and I'm special and grand way, or I'm pathetic and broken way, you can't learn it, because that's not the lesson. The lesson is outside of those categories. So I really do worry about how, on the one hand, young people will really get righteously pissed off about being pushed into a category, whether it's their fashion choices or their political beliefs or whatever. They want to be themselves. And yet we're teaching people to recite the list of things that they have, supposedly.
Yeah.
And, people will come into therapy and the first 5 minutes will be label after label after label after label after label that the person really wants you to understand they have.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, now that I'm inside this system of self-objectification and dehumanization that has all of these different forms, help me to be whole and free. Well, dude, that may be a contradiction. You may have to soften all that and show up to the fact that, no, you're not special in your suffering. And your suffering can be used as a guide, as a help. You may come to see it on the other side of it as a precious gift.
Yeah.
And I think it is, but I won't say that to people early on. So I was on the National Institute of Drug Abuse Advisory Council, which technically decides whether or not you can spend those $1 billion. And, it was appointed by Donna Shalala as head of HHS, the Health and Human Services, a cabinet officer in the Clinton administration. But of course, she didn't know me from Adam. The people at NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Use, part of the National Institute of Health, the leader there, Alan Lashner, became the head of American Association for the Advancement of Science, a major, major scientific group. Really good guy. He kind of liked me, and he put me on there. And and I'm, well, what do I know about substance abuse? I mean, I'm just, but it turned out, what do you mean? What do I know about substance abuse? My dad was an alcoholic, and I lived this, but I really enjoyed my time there. But I'm going to say something a little critical of Alan. You may not have seen it if you're not in the U.S., but there was a whole time of, this is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. And so a fried apple, fried egg, rather, etc. There was a whole kind of thing about addiction as a brain disease, and trying to decrease the stigma and the dehumanization of people who struggle with substances.
Yeah.
It's even more, maybe. Well, I don't know about psychosis. Psychosis is pretty damn dehumanized, but depression, anxiety, Congress people have but you get over into drug addiction, boy, that's, you're starting to get close to people who should be sterilized or going back to the 150-year-old of eugenic agenda. But okay, these are drugs, this is your brain on drugs, going to make more compassion, because then you're going to see addiction as a disease. Well, it doesn't meet the definitions of a disease, but okay, I get that. Well, then we start doing the research on what happens when you convince people that they have this disease, and what happens to people around them. I was doing work on implicit cognition at the time. And one of the most stigmatizing words that you can give to somebody is that they have a brain disease. Well, think about it. If your brother had a brain disease and you thought, they might be unreliable or do destructive things or whatever because of it, yeah, you'll have compassion towards them. But their horizons in your mind will now be massively foreshortened.
Yeah.
Don't expect anything of that person. They've got a brain disease.
Yeah.
Your hope for them, the potential, the concern you have, the limitations you might put in, this is what we mean by not destigmatization. Bullshit. That's not destigmatization. That's putting people in a box and then treating them with pity. How do you feel when you're put in a box and treated with pity? Has that ever happened to you? Probably has in some way, shape, or form. You've probably seen it in some way, shape, or form. And if it's not pity, it could be something else, treating them as if they're dangerous, or treating them as if they're stupid or stupid. So I understand the heart of it. I don't want to criticize it, and it is true that there's this place of invalidation and of dehumanization that comes inside a lack of understanding that these labels are designed to help correct.
Yeah.
But the labels themselves then become the instruments and tools for another face and form of the same basic thing, in which the potential of a human being is squeezed down, and you're required to live inside that category, and it'll never leave. I mean, once you're inside borderline personality disorder, do you ever leave? Is there any way out? There's no way out. But I know of. I mean, even things you've talked about. People will carry those categories in their head. Does that have an impact on them? Yeah. I mean, it's a bold thing and a wonderful thing. That's why I honored your courage. And can we find another way? And the way I would like to find is one where we dig down to the processes that empower or that entrap. You've got one in the title of your podcast. You probably put it there because you know that it so easily becomes a trap, right? But there's a number of them. And I'm on a part of a scientific community that has been trying to get the smallest set that does the most things. We think we've actually done that. I just recently did, I and my mates, Joe Sorochi and Stefan Hoffman in Germany, looked at every randomized trial ever done in the history of the world for mental health outcome that collected processes of change information and identified through the statistics that are considered to be proper the functionally important pathway of change for that intervention. It took us 3 years to do it. It was 55,000 studies we had to read, and a team of 60 in 3 years. So it's current through 2018. Good. But we just published it. And you can capture 80% of everything you need to know by saying you need to learn to be more emotionally open and cognitively flexible, to take the perspective of others and to define yourself as that kind of perspective taking, a sense of self. Focus on your values, get your feet moving towards them, and show up in the now. Attend to what's important. In one shape or form, thinking flexibly and fluidly, feeling flexibly and fluidly, perspective taking and attention being flexible and fluid, clear values and habits built around them. Now you add the social cultural thing. By the way, relationships really matter. That's a big chunk. And by the way, you have a body, you got to take care of your health. So diet, sleep, exercise, drinking. By the time I've finished what I just said, 92% of everything we know about how change happens is in those paragraphs. Now, how to notice them and retain them is part of it. How to get them going in the beginning is part of it. ACT has these acceptance. Well, that's about emotional openness. Diffusion, that's about cognitive flexibility. Attention to the now. So that's right inside it. This witnessing, noticing, transcendent sense of self, that's core of spirituality, which we've been talking about. Chosen values and commitment to building habits around them. So ACT alone, just ACT and mindfulness measures, accounts for 55%. But if you get a little more flexible, so here's what I'm saying to you. We know at least a big chunk, after 50 years of randomized trials, some of them had mediational analyses adequate to figure out why did they work. Most of them don't. But all the ones that do, if I look at every single one, I can put them into a paragraph I can say on a podcast.
Yeah.
So why don't we get about busy putting those things into our schools, our churches, our work groups, our hearts, our heads, our hands, into our podcasts, into our therapy programs. You don't have to call it ACT, call it anything. I don't care. Put it into our own. Well, and life itself will do this. I mean, life itself will teach you the limits of ego, or of running away from your own pain, or of buying into your stories, or of attending to only what's broken about you, or forgetting even that you get to choose what you're about in life, and that instead mobilizing your behavioral resources around running away or fighting or subtracting your own history, instead of showing up to the possibilities of this moving moment of now that creates the future that you want. So I don't think it's that complicated. I think the alternative to all these normative top-down categories is you, probably with technological aids, with wearables and regularly reporting in, look at the processes of change that are known to matter. I'm actively developing apps that will do this, by the way. That's one reason I did. But even if you could do it yourself with paper and pencil, I'm rewriting Get Out of Your Mind into Your Life right now. My 5 minutes of fame, when it was written in Time magazine and a 5-page story, and beat Harry Potter for one glorious week on Amazon. Get Out of Your Mind in Your Life was the first big ACT self-help book. And it works really, really well. But we've shown that in randomized trials and all that, but we're rewriting it now to include more of what I just said, because 20 years later, it was published in 2005, almost 20 years later, we've learned a lot. And not just us, a whole bunch of other people learn a lot. And there's a consilience that fits together. And it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense evolutionarily. If you can't vary, you can't evolve. If you can't select the winners, you can't evolve. If you can't retain the winners, you can't evolve. And learning how to fit that to context, because no adaptation is good for everything, everywhere, always. So I think we can bring our science tools to the bottom-up world our children are growing up in, that 10 years from now will, when we sweep away the disgusting legacy of top-down normative categories and Galton's eugenic dreams of forcing people into who's up and who's down, and stop sorting people and start empowering people, that we'll be able to step forward and say on our podcast and everywhere else, are you working on these processes that we know are liberating and uplifting? I walk through the ACT vision on that on Liberated Mind, and people can read it, and it's filled with science stuff. And in the back of the book, it's a ridiculous amount of science. I don't burden it with references other than little things you have to go to the back of the book. But I mean, just what I'm talking about, the ACT world is sitting on about 4,000 studies, including 1,000 randomized trials. So we learned a lot. In other areas of the world, of science, when you focus on it and work on it, it gets better. But do you know, over the last 50 years, the effect sizes, the magnitude of the impact that you can get from evidence-based methods to change mental health problems hasn't gone up one iota. And I think it's because we got drawn into this protocol for syndromes vision. Let's find out what you have, and here's a 400-page book that we're going to shove in your mouth. To which I just say no. I think the kids are right to not buy the abnormal psychology book. Of course, they just retitled them psychopathology because they still want to sell the books. But boy, I think the kids sense there's something wrong with all of this biomedicalizing of human suffering and this categorizing and shoving people into categories. Now, there's things in there that are important, even the medications. So don't turn me into a cartoon. Yes, if you can catch fish in the open ocean, then they've got antidepressant. It's too much, yes. 1 out of 4 women in the United States of America last year on antidepressants. No, that makes no sense. There's no scientist, none, who's careful and cautious who would say that's right. But it ain't just the medications. We're shoving all kinds of psychotherapy and stuff on people inside the wrong vision. The
Yeah.
right vision, I think, is something a little I mean, here you're saying things like, depression is a gift. It is. Depression is a natural kind of evolving of a system to a logical end that if you look at it, it's like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't work. Well, it shouldn't be. Oh, okay, here's the door you can enter into Hotel California called depression and you'll never leave. Now, I don't want to invite people into that hotel you can't leave. I mean, if the words help you on a journey that's empowering, okay, I don't care. I'm not even that I'm not fighting about. But I really want us to focus on the needs of the 5 out of 5 and the 1 out of 5. And I think if we do that, the natural impact will be to stop objectifying and dehumanizing, because everybody will see that they have a stake. And that doesn't mean everybody has depression. It doesn't mean everybody has a disorder. It means we are all working on our mental resilience and on the trapdoors that are built into the human mind and exacerbated by our culture in the most unwise portions of it, but are helped by our culture and the wiser parts of it, which tend to be in our wisdom traditions and our spiritual traditions and some of the deeper clinical traditions. And Thomas Szasz, boy, was he beaten up. Like, I mean, he was just beaten like like taking sticks to baby seals. A disgusting metaphor, but that was just true. I mean, man, you just academic psychiatry and moneyed interests and tortured him.
Yeah.
But I think that analysis is held up much better than a lot of the alternative analyses that said it's always just around the corner with just enough. And when we have the full genome and when we have and now take genomics, we know it's a lie. We have 250,000 people with full genomic analyses and we can't account for even the small percentage. You're seeking biomarkers? No, it's genetics is part of it. So is epigenetics. So it's just what's happening within your body based on what you eat and do. So is your psychological process, social, cultural. I mean, cells are systems for turning environment and behavior into biology. We're one complex system, and the one goes all the way out to the one. It goes all the way out to all of life on the earth. I mean, that level. Now, to make it solvable, we can do complex networks. We can think in ways. I mean, Netflix does it. I mean, the machine learning algorithms aren't like, oh, if you like this, you'll get that. No, it's way, way, way beyond that. But Chat GPT is so far beyond that. And we're in the horse and buggy era with mental health, and everybody can buy a car as long as it's black. That's so yesterday that let's get on about the business of understanding human complexity in a way that empowers and doesn't categorize. And I think that's the future of our science. We better come into it with a lot of humility, because if we get into that clearing and say, well, what can we learn? You're going to look around and see monks in there, and they've been there for thousands of years. You're going to find a lot of humanity in that clearing, and it ain't going to be just the biostatisticians.
I love that you amongst all of that, which I fully agree with. I love that you reference like the psychology, the psyche, the human condition, it being a complex system. And it kind of links all the way back to the beginning of this talk as well, in terms of the grooves. And it's almost like the industry, the institution itself of psychiatry has found itself in a groove of isolating symptoms or isolating biochemistry. And I think, one thing, and I know this is absolutely not what you're saying, and I will be clear also for how I talk about this topic as well, because I had a response to something that I posted on deconstructing depression. Someone reached out on Instagram. Say reached out. It was a bit of an attack, and it caught me off guard. But they said that I was letting down being a mental health advocate and all this stuff. And I was like, I'm open for a conversation. But one thing that I'm absolutely not trying to do in talking from this space is to minimize the struggle. It is to take anything away. And I think the issue is that, coming again, like the acceptance, compassion of like wherever you are at, it has to be met fully, and meeting it fully. And that's not to say, because I know I went through a spell where I was on antidepressants, and it actually allowed me to outsource responsibility. Now, like you say with clients, you don't say certain things straight away. That is a statement that would have triggered the hell out of me some time ago. Now I understand that differently. But it's not to say like, it's not a shaming mechanism or a way to ridicule, but to actually say there are choices in this quantum universal molecule dimension of mind. There are choices, and there's always something that you can try. I think the issue is like depression can, in my experience, it's almost like all those pathways disappear from view. So it's really hard to sift through, but there's always a choice. And even if it's just staying with it long enough to find that choice. I'm a big believer in the psyche's intelligence, self-healing intelligence as well. And like you say, depression, of course, is a natural response, and I wonder,
yeah, let me take it all over to psychosis, because you raised that. We settled in on the standard of care really fast that said, so-called antipsychotic, the more honest earlier version was major tranquilizers. Because yes, I mean, all they did was, if you look at the rat models and animal models that were finding these chemicals back in the day in psychopharm, is they wanted chemicals that would not diminish escape, but would diminish avoidance. And you can filter that in behavioral preparations with animals, and most of those things can be helpful with, but part of what that means is that there's some painful things in there that people are going to have to go visit. And yeah, the chemicals can dampen down that, that process. But should we do that? Is that the only way to sort of deal with those things? And do they have side effects? Well, then, of course, we start learning that they have massive things, like you start messing around with dopamine to that degree, you get movement disorders that are lifelong and you can't get out of it. No, without some more medication, but even those have side effects. You have side effects of the medication treating the side effects. Plus, is there anything that could have happened inside that journey that may have included voices or seeing things that others don't see or whatever, that would be healthy and helpful for that person? Well, the studies that were done, the late Gordon Paul, one of the heroes of evidence-based psychotherapy, because his dissertation was really one of the best, earliest randomized trials done of the psychosocial method. He moved over into this, saw the huge need, and really was working on things like halfway houses with the kind of training in terms of making it safe socially for people who sometimes have had hard histories, or that's part of it for them, et cetera. Kind of walking people through, and I would say out of, but you could say out of psychosis, and with really good long-term outcomes. But the big randomized trials with long-term outcomes with really credible psychosocial interventions were never done. Why? Because it became a standard of care and it was unethical to do them. You couldn't do them. Well, that's a rigged game. How did that happen so fast? Can you say money? So okay, I'm not trying to shame psychiatry and so forth. There's a lot of good hearts in there that were trying to do the best they could. But now we're 50 years later, and the story about if it's just around the corner and we'll understand why the genes that lead to the brain, that leads to the disorder, that leads to, no, we're not. That vision is gone. If you can't find it through rummaging through 250,000 people with their full genomic analysis, etc. Now, of course, the brain is involved. It's all that, but it's a complex system. So how are we now going to push the reset button and start really opening ourselves up to the possibility that these different forms are reflections of a basic yearning? There's a set of yearnings that are underneath it, and there's an opportunity because we do get to see kind of what works and what doesn't, and there's features. This is another thing. It isn't just like, oh, that doesn't work. There's features inside that solution that are helpful. Okay, I'll give you an example. Voice hearers will regularly, if you stop just categorizing, treating, trying to diminish and trank people down to the point that, do all the symptoms go away? No, but you get a little bit of separation, enough that you don't run out into the street or do something that's too weird, or you get shoved into, a hospital because you're acting too goofy. But it isn't that the symptoms go away. They're still there, but they're diminished down, but through the fog of a heavy trank world. Yeah, but if you follow the natural history of voice hearers who didn't ever do that, some of the things the voices say are sometimes really helpful. And people can learn to discriminate sometimes. A sense that this is helpful and a sense that this isn't. Not everybody. You can get entangled in the voices. And command hallucinations, not a good thing, especially if it's saying go do violent things, etc. I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I'm even okay with so-called antipsychotics under those conditions. Lower dose, tapered, lots of psychosocial support. Don't reprogram the entire nervous system so that people have to deal with movement disorders the rest of their freaking life. Like, come on. And by the way, you're going to live 12 years on average, 12 years shorter, because it's so, some of these, oh, this is the new version. Yeah. Look at the mortality rates. I mean, anyway, we missed an opportunity that the Zazes would open up. Zaz wasn't saying, oh, this isn't about anything. Who cares?
Exactly.
That's not what the message. It's, don't turn this into a cartoon and a category, and get into, the kind of the process of untangling this knot. R.D. Lang, part of that same generation, similar message as Zaz. And let's see what's in there. The human experience of a psychotic journey is often filled with insights that you can use, or with opportunities. Not every single one, but so we've left so many opportunities on the ground. Back to your depression example, there's really good reason to believe that depression is part of a kind of a biological reset button that you push when a major transition has to happen. When suddenly, things are removed because of loss or death, or, and you go through a place that is withdrawn, and, there's a reason we're wearing black. There's a reason why you seek out. I mean, look at the Merida therapy kind of things from long ago, before we knew much about the brain and all. Pretty interesting. Resonates with some ACT ideas, by the way. So much so that people sometimes think I stole it from Merida, but I didn't. I didn't even hear about Merida until way into the ACT journey. But it was, what would happen if you treated this process as something that might contain some wisdom and has some positive features to it.
Yeah.
So it's a little scarier, but it's not going to be stigmatizing. It's less stigmatizing to my way of thinking than just giving people categories
Yeah.
and clown suits to crawl into that they can never get out of. That's not real destigmatization.
Yeah.
That's just a, I don't know. That's that kind of foreshortening people's futures in the name of being kind. There's nothing kind about that. Well, there's something kind about it, but it's not where we should end up. Who knows how many, how many Nashes of the world have been eliminated because of that. I'm blocking on his first name. What's his
I'm
name?
not sure. I'm not sure, but I
What
do.
is
Nash.
Nasser? Am I having an
I've not
overload?
heard of him. So
Oh
he
yeah,
so
yeah,
he
yeah.
he heard voices
Sure,
and
you have a beautiful mind. What's his
oh,
name?
Thomas Nash. Is it Thomas Nash? Thomas Nash?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Russell Crowe's. Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
I
This.
mean, they romanticized it and Hollywoodized it and
Yeah.
turned it into visual hallucinations. It was auditory, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But that was a real person who really, really, through game theory and all that,
Yeah.
changed our understanding of the world and was and is.
Yeah.
He's still alive. Psychotic.
I think. Did he? I'm not sure if he died or possibly suicide. I don't know if I'm mixing that up with
Oh, I don't think
Imitation
so.
Game. No, I'm thinking of Imitation Game then because I watched that recently with Alan Turing, who
Yeah.
suffered with his mental health as well. One I say one thing I want to say. I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah.
But where was I going to go with that? Depression. There's a Joseph Campbell quote that I love, which is the psychotic drowns in the same rivers the mystic swims in delight.
Right.
Which I really like that. It needs, my understanding is that it needs the expansion to include a wider dimension of being in order to better discern when is this a problem and when it isn't. Like you say with hearing voices, how do you then discern? Like I would love for that level of acceptance and care to be brought to these experiences. So rather than people feeling shame, they're just like, what is that voice telling you? Is there something to learn? And being guided along the way, and that's a huge transformation that we're yearning for, really. I think in all experiences, which is exactly what ACT approaches in terms of the spectrum of the abnormal and the kind of intense experiences. But that was what I was going to say. Like this studies that I've done, studies that I've definitely not done any studies like you, but the research that I've done into creativity really starts to surface some intriguing stuff, around like great philosophers. People like Aristotle was convinced that God spoke to him and his philosophy was coming from God. We pathologize that. I think Saz also says like Jesus would have been put in an institute.
Of course you would.
So it's like we've got to be able to pass within that wider paradigm to then be able to say,
Well, I'm
this
back to
is
where I started earlier on, which is there's more thoughts in your head, potentially a possibility than our molecules in the universe by a multiple. Well, and so creative people, dance among the little fibers of their network. And they sometimes have a sense when they find things. It's very common. Mathematicians, musicians, artists, etc., who are creative, way out on the edge of that. There's a felt sense of understanding or connection or possibility that occurs. Not a ding 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 kind of that gets worked out. Now it can be ding 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 can be very creative too, but I'm really interested by those ones that are creative to the point where you could not turn it into a paint by numbers formula. It's not like I thought this and then I thought this and I thought this. It's not like just walking next door by following a path. It's something that's out on the edges where you don't know, and you emotionally opened yourself up to a state of not knowing, and you allowed fragmentary connections and metaphors and felt senses and so forth to restructure. When we've done modeling if you start thinking where a relational frame theorist does, you start thinking of thoughts as networks of relationships that are contextually controlled, so the relationships are not set. They're not like a Lego block or something, or like Lincoln Logs or Tinker Toys. They're shimmering, changing sets, because it's always, but some are more apt than others in these connections. We actually, when we model it, and it's easy to sort of show, if you just take 100 things and you tell me how they're all related, and then I look at all the possible connections, and we now have our programs that will do that. We've published them. This is a fun one. The single most common relation of all among all the things in your head are I don't know. Like it'd be that kind of game you sometimes see people play, or something like, Susie is taller than Sam and Sam is faster than George. So who's faster, Susie or George? Where the proper answer is I don't know. I hope I did that right. I wasn't really thinking carefully about it. But you know what I mean, where you've got connections that are known, but then because of that, there's a known connection that consists of this connection called I don't know. So of all the thoughts that you can derive in your head, the vast majority are I don't know, if you just follow the relational features. You will impose upon that. That's my point of view. Is the father of, look around the room, you'll impose upon that, but be careful, because what that means is the mind so yearns to know that it will give an answer that will give you knowing, even if it's bullshit, to everything. Well, talk about fake news. Us getting into a world now where you literally may not be able to recognize, is this a real actor, or is this computer generated? Did Joe Biden really do that to the sheep on the front lawn of the White House? I don't think so, but I can see it with my own eyes. Welcome to that world where the yearning for knowing, which is so powerful. Even before we get language, non-human animals spend lots of their time exploring and so forth, because you need to know where you are, where's the breath holes if you're underneath the ice, where's the escape holes if you might be a predator might show up, where are the places to eat. You need to, and our cognitive abilities allow us to do that same process, now expanded across time and space. There isn't anything in the universe that you can't talk about, think about, reason about. Nothing. Think about it, you'll see. Because as soon as you think about it, it's in your network. So there are things you're not thinking about. But you can think about it, or at least you can't prove me that you can't, because as soon as you think about it, you do. Well, my point being here, if you have such a wild horse as that, which will give us creativity and insanity, that will give us love and disconnection, will give us community and isolation, will give us joy and hate. You can't manage it by with the bad thoughts and with the good. You can't manage it the way a janitor would sweep up dirt on the floor. You have to manage it in a wiser way that allows you to take what's useful, leave the rest, focus on what's important, but also learn, for lots and lots of things, how to go out to the edges and find your solutions that fit for you and what you yearn for. And I might even share with others. I mean, if that world is coming with the robots and the AI programs and so forth, we will be afforded, if we do it right culturally and don't just have a few billionaires controlling everybody, we'll be afforded the opportunity to reason and write and think and play and love, and it really, really could be the future of humanity. Well, where would we put that? I hope we put it into creativity, for example. There's lots of cool things we can learn. So we're swimming in the same stream as wisdom, suffering, creativity, rigidity. But the unless you just want to jump into the water and hope that you don't drown, jump into the water, hope that you learn to swim, hope that you're one of the lucky ones that have figured out how to do something really useful. We better figure out how to help people learn how to swim in that vast ocean of thought that's possible, to push the limits, to break down the walls, to escape from the grooved patterns that, the commercial interests are trying to produce for you, whether you like it or not. I'm a little fearful that between money and AI, grooving has become massively easier. I liked it when they were trying to put Obamacare into the world, only in the US, universal health care is like going to kill you. No, it's not. And they were trying to figure out how to advertise it. And we used our methods of implicit cognition that came out of the relational frame theory to help people in Nevada figure out to do it. And they do. They call it something like Nevada Health Link. And we told them, just use Nevada. Don't say state. Don't say government. For goodness sakes, don't say U.S. Don't say federal. Don't say, because we vetted all these things, and we could look at what happened in the cognitive networks of people who had insurance because we didn't want to offend them, and who had never had insurance because we wanted to empower them. And we came up with words and pictures, and we vetted all of that scientifically. Well, this is little baby bouncies compared to what Netflix is doing to you right now, or Google, or any of the other ones. And what's coming, boy, it's 1,000 times more able to groove you for their interests. What I was doing I thought was pro-social, but it could easily be just flat out economic. Hopefully not evil. I guess it could be for evil. I mean, you could get paranoid about that. But the world that's coming will require more wisdom of us all in using these processes of change to liberate our minds. I'm echoing the title of my book, but not just for commercial reasons.
I see it. I can see it as well. We've got the front.
Product placement.
It's got to be done.
I got to write my Medium blogs.
Yes.
Don't you are part of Medium?
This is what inspired me to reach out. I'm part of the team at Medium. I've been enjoying your work there. Shout out to my colleague Andrew as well. He's a big fan of your work.
Maybe before we leave, I'll ask you a couple more questions about Medium, because I need to understand those folks. I like Medium a lot. So
anyway. For sure. We'll do that off air, that one.
Yes.
Steve, thanks so much. A friend of mine, Imogen, gave me, it was a long time ago, she gave me The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. Which is when I was first introduced to ACT. And I think I said in the email when I reached out to you, like, I feel that very fit into this conversation and how dynamic and expansive it is. I really feel that ACT is such a powerful tool to, in terms of synthesizing so much. And in terms of just being able to talk to you and have this space to kind of go on this journey has been a real delight, and something I feel really fortunate to have been able to have done. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And thank you for this an opportunity to kind of amplify our voices for the good of the world the best we can. Who knows how it lands, but thanks for the opportunity to serve the people that you serve.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mind That Ego podcast. To stay up to date, you can join the Mind That Ego mailing list if you head to mindthatego.com/MFM. You'll also get a copy of my book, Mindsets for Mindfulness, when you join. You can also follow Mind That Ego on Facebook and YouTube, where the podcasts are also displayed in video format along with other inspired videos that I create. Or if Instagram is more your social media of choice, you can follow me at Ricky_Deriz. That's DERISZ.